Oh, that might be me needing to also let people in. No. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Anyone?
Yeah, we can see it.
You can see it? Okay, great. So OJCS Bring Your Own Device is an initiative that we launched this past year in grades 4 to 8. We did our soft launch of our Bring Your Own Device program. And basically, how it started is that teachers in their classrooms were starting to use technology more. Naturally, students started to begin bringing in their own devices, whether through recommendations through their IEP or just because they had their devices. From that, the school then made the decision to increase their purchase of technology in the school. So we currently have, I'm not sure if you're aware, we have 60 iPads, 2 shared carts that are used in the school. More students started to bring devices or were borrowing from the school because of the fact that we had more access to it. More planning by the teachers, again, was being put into that. And then we launched the soft launch of our BYOD this current school year. So when we think about why we have a Bring Your Own Device program in our school, it really matches with everything that we believe to be true about teaching and learning, as well as the things that we use as our guiding North Stars. So for example, when we say we own our own learning, we want our students to become self-directed learners. And as I go through these, you'll see that everything can fit, no matter whether it's owning your own learning, floor but no ceiling, personalized learning, global connections, being prepared for the future. Every example that I give fits with each one of those. So here's just an example of a student who has taken his own interests and his own learning into his own hands. And in his blog, he has created talking about something that he's passionate about, that he has done research on, and is sharing that with the world because his blog is public, and he's sharing what he has done, how he created it, putting pictures, asking questions, and making those connections with people who share interests with him. But that was completely self-directed. None of that was something that was asked of him to do. So that in itself shows that there is a floor, but no ceiling. We introduced those blogs as something that we do in our school, student blogs, and he has taken it way beyond what we could have asked or hoped for. He is not bound by the fact that he is at home right now or whether he's in school. He's able to add to that no matter what. Another example that even came from grade 3 is that for Innovation Day, the students were taking videos and pictures and documenting their learning throughout Innovation Day in their process. And a lot of students who wanted to continue working on it at home using the videos that they had taken couldn't continue to work on that because their videos and things that they had been working on were on the iPads at school. So one of the things that I'll get into more is just that, yes, we do a lot of things that are cloud-based, and certain devices lend themselves to that more, but there are instances when something is being done on a school device that it doesn't necessarily translate and allow that student to continue working on that if they so choose. Being that self-directed learner, they're hindered by the fact that the information is on the device at school. We're able to personalize learning to the students when they each have their own device, even more so than we are able to when not. It gives choice, it gives variety, it gives flexibility. The students are engaged with it. They can explore and research, again, things that they are interested in their own time. So another example is, here is a video of a student who was researching about American Sign Language. She wanted to teach herself how to speak sign language because she had somebody in her karate class who was deaf. And so aside from being able to learn and teach herself, she was then able to make a connection with somebody from the deaf community. And in the class, she FaceTimed with him, practiced what she had learned. He was helping her and correcting her and teaching her more things. And then that learning continued. He offered to continue to support her in her learning and check in with her. And by having that connection between the home and school and her life outside and inside, she was able to continue that learning. Making global connections. A lot of us have participated, a lot of classes, either as a class or as an individual student, have participated in the EduBlog Student Blogging Challenge. And the students have made connections with people all over the world. It is a program that was initiated by EduBlogs, by one of their educators in Australia. And it has grown, it has become popular amongst countries all over Canada, United States, Australia. I think we even had some people from India and in Europe, different countries in Europe. So here's actually from grade 4 on their class blog where this student had written something, and there were comments to what she had written. But if you'll notice, this student had to wait and is posting as Miss Bennett when she's responding to this person who had commented for her. And part of that was she needed to wait to see that comment, wait to see and wait to respond until she was back in school to be able to have that connection and that interaction with those people. And students have had people comment on their blogs. They've written in French, and people from other countries have commented in different languages, and they've practiced their language skills that way as well. And then, as John mentioned, we don't know what the future is. When we launched BYOD, we never, ever could have imagined that we would be in a situation where technology would actually be the thing that kept us all connected because we had no other choice, and kept us learning because we had no other choice. Some of the things that I've been able to do with my students, because they had the comfort level with the technology, because they already had their own devices, that transition was seamless into us moving. It wasn't ideal. I miss seeing them and they miss seeing each other, but to be able to make that transition so quickly and so easily, and to continue projects that we were working on and continue things that we had been doing, we didn't have to put them on hold because the information, the pictures, the videos that they needed were on devices at school. They were able to feel comfortable with the device that they had already, log in and continue working with it. Their digital citizenship in terms of the things that they know how to do, how to respond respectfully to each other, their own organizational skills, and being, again, self-directed learners, knowing where to find their files, how to connect, how to comment in this world on the way that they are interacting with each other, the way to respectfully communicate with each other and with their teachers, has been incredible. So there's so much that, and because we don't know what the future will be, we don't know how long we will be in this environment, how often we'll have to come back to this environment for different periods of time, that if students already have their own devices, that those transitions back and forth can be seamless. So clearly there are so many things that we use these devices for. And I'm not going to actually read each one of these, but if you just look at how many things are on here, and this is not even a full list, an extensive list of everything that we can and do in school, but then look at the things that I know are those things that are hot topics of what we don't want them used for and things that we have concerns for. Students are not playing games all day. They are not watching inappropriate videos. They're not taking their devices and throwing them to each other so that they have the potential to fall. And there is no teacher who uses their device for every activity, every minute of every day. There are kids who try to play games. There are kids who may try to watch inappropriate videos. There may be accidents when something falls and breaks, but that's no different than using a shared device as it would be if they had their own. And even if there were no devices, they would be passing notes. They would be creating games that we couldn't think of either. And so we recognize that there is a balance. We recognize the value in conversation, in breaks from screen time, in doing things by hand and creativity and writing things by hand. All those things can be true at the same time as having the device available to do all these other things as well. So it just opens up a world. It breaks down the walls. It doesn't have them relying on solely their teachers who are not experts in everything, and allowing them to become more globally aware, and that cultural literacy, which is so important, and access to things, and being critical and being creative and thinking. There's so much, and even that inclusivity of it not just being the students who quote unquote need the device because it says so in their IEP. It just becomes another important tool, just like the other tools that we use in school. So when students have their own devices, they're more comfortable and proficient with that device. It's not sometimes on an iPad, sometimes on this, sometimes on that. We want to expose them to different things, but they get so proud of their device, and they take ownership over it, and they personalize it and customize it with tools that work for them, that are not the same as tools that are going to work for everyone. They can continue their learning no matter where they are, whether they're at school or at home. I know this is, something that is not necessarily it is one piece of it, but when you do share devices, there are challenges that do come from that in a school, in that they may not always be available. You can start a project on a device and then another class borrows it, and just like the trend is to move away from computer labs as they used to be. When you have the devices in school, in the classroom, that as soon as a question comes up, that learning is completely student guided and authentic in that moment. It's not, hold that thought until I can go and borrow, or until 2:00 on Wednesday when we have our computer time. Let's dive into that right now. Let's go for it, which is, again, also something that is in this time where we have distance learning and asynchronous learning. We are learning so much, and it ties into what John's blog post about returning to school, or going forward to school, not going back. There are a lot of things that we're going to learn from this that hopefully will translate when we're back in the building together. And they collaborate, and they ask questions, and they create with their peers, even sitting side by side. That dialogue is continuing between them, yet they're both working on something, and adding their own pieces to it, and collaborating just as we do with our colleagues and our friends. So we do have policies in place to try and help students stay on track with what we believe to be true, and policies and procedures in place for when those rules are broken or abused. So in class, students know that their devices are to be used for schoolwork only, and only when the teacher has asked you to use it. In order to manage that they stay closed until asked to open, many teachers have implemented tech parking lots. Actually, it was developed by a student, where you can have those kind of dish racks, and students put their computers and iPads and things inside there until they're asked to open it. So there's no tempting to try and open it up and do something you're not supposed to. Some teachers use show me 45, where you would close your laptop to 45-degree angle so that you're not distracted by what's on the screen. If important information needs to be shared with the students, that they're all listening. We circulate through the classroom and check the things that they're looking at and what they are doing. We do multiple check-ins throughout classes saying, you know, I see where you are currently and where you are by the end of the period. And our internet is filtered to make sure that any inappropriate websites are not being accessed. And that is a growing list. We can always add to it. No devices are allowed at lunch or at recess time, even when it's indoor recess. They need that break. They should be going outside, they should be playing, they should be running around indoors, they could be playing games, they can be creative that way. And when a rule is broken, different things happen depending on, you know, the severity of the situation, the frequency of it happening. So usually it will result in a loss for either the period, the day, or the week. And there will always, always, always be a discussion, just like any other policy that would be broken in our school, of why did it happen? What was the barrier that caused that to happen? Do you need to be sitting in a different spot? What can we do to help to not have that violation happen again? And there will also always be a communication home. So I've talked a lot. Before I continue on to the specs and finances of everything, I just wanted to open it up for any questions. I'll stop sharing for a minute while we do that, unless we end up needing my screen.
So I'll mediate what I see in the chat, and then we'll open up for questions that have not yet been asked. And you can do this in one of two ways. You can either drop your question in the chat and we'll just go in order as they're being dropped, or once we finish that, you are welcome to indicate in the chat, or you can just wave at us, or whatever you need to do to give us your attention. So the first question is around how will the use of technology, or the ownership of devices, or the way in which the school uses the device, how does that translate into a high school context if what we are enabling students to do isn't always necessarily the norm for what high school life looks like? Those are my words. That's not how you phrase it, Jeremy. So if I didn't get the nuance of your question correctly, by all means, like you can ask the question directly yourself. Okay, I'll take that as a positive sign. So before I give whatever my answer to that question might be, Ms. Thompson, if you want to take a crack at that first. You don't have to.
Yeah, you could go ahead.
Ms. Gordon wants to say something. Fantastic. But then she has to unmute herself. I'm sure it's going to be worth waiting. You did
okay. Grid mode was, for the record, not the best mode for unmuting myself. So I have ungridded myself. So I just wanted to speak briefly to this, and then I'll let John jump in. I have a child in high school. He went very proficient with typing and various applications, and knew how to Google, use every Google app. And there's no question that despite the fact that our local high schools are often lagging with the technology they can offer, all teachers are using technology for their lessons and for the follow-up tasks. What typically ends up happening is they have a small amount of Chromebooks in each classroom, and then they divide the kids up into small groups and they have to share. And that's not the case for my child, who goes with his own laptop, fully equipped to navigate everything. So it is true that I think some schools don't have as much technology as would be helpful to everybody. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be equipping our children with what they need and with the skills with which to find the most amount of success. That's my 2 cents.
And the only thing I'll layer on that is that any analog skill, and I don't mean that word pejoratively, but any analog skill that a student would need to possess in order to be successful at high school, we would have a responsibility for ensuring is in place. So I'll use an example that's probably not an example, but like it would be like, they would still need to learn how to handwrite, even if by the time they get into high school, they are likely typing or using voice to text. Like there's a certain set of analog skills that we would ensure kids are successful for. It's partly why we do the exams the way we do exams in the middle school. It's not even so much that it's as much about giving them experience with something they're going to encounter in high school as it is about whether or not we think those exams have actual significant educational value in and of themselves. To underline something that that Ms. Gordon said, which is exactly what I think you just typed in, Jeremy, is that there is regardless of how the device is used pedagogically in the classroom, the executive functioning and organizational skills that our students come out of OJCS with are going to be invaluable in any context, whether the school requires their use or not. The way in which kids learn for themselves, the best way for them to be organized, to keep track of their homework, to navigate their calendar, to chunk projects into steps and put those chunks in their Google Keep or their Google Calendar or whatever tools they've become familiar with and work for them in our school. Those things become really, really important, whether or not the teacher in class makes use of a particular platform in the moment. And then the last thing I would say is that it is likely going to be true that there are things that our school does by virtue of its philosophy and approach that in some places are just going to be sooner or earlier or an earlier adapter of something that may not be living in quite the same way in their next school of choice. So long as we've prepared them successfully for the transition, there's no reason not to expose them to things that we think are really educationally meaningful and valuable, even if all of those things aren't going to carry with them necessarily in the same way into high school. And for me, the student blog folios is the best example of that. Very few schools utilize that platform at all, and certainly not the way that we do, but it's such a rich educational experience that we still want to give it to our students, even if they're unlikely to find something that looks exactly like that on the high school level. Let me jump back into the chat. So I'm gonna save the question about laptop versus tablet till we get to the specs, and I'm gonna save security until we get there. And then let me.
Can I just ask to clarify what you mean by security, Leora? You can.
Sorry. So will each device have security apps installed to protect the computer from damaging files?
Okay. I can answer that, or I can get to it after when we get to the differences.
Yeah, well, when we get to the specs, we'll go through that. So I'm going to move to the blogging question for now, and then we'll take other questions, and we'll cycle back to the specs and the finances and whatnot. So blogging and blog folios. So it's really important to keep in mind that that there is a process through which comments are moderated before they become public facing, even for those students who have opted for the most maximally public facing positions with their blog folios. Remember or know that as parents, you ultimately reserve the right to decide to what degree anything that your child does is public facing. When it comes to the blog folios themselves, we give parents a range of choices from the most maximally publicly facing, which is typically sort of first name, last initial things publicly facing. There are some families who opt for an avatar. There are some families who opt for everything to be password protected, and you could ultimately ask for things to be entirely kept private between your child and the teacher. In any one of those scenarios, the ones that are public facing, when a comment comes in, it has to be moderated before it is made public. As the kids age through the system, at the beginning, it's the teacher who will own that entire operating system, so much so that the child might not even know that the comment was made before it's been removed or spammed if it needs to be. As they get older, as they prepare to get out into the wider world, then conversations happen around the whole process of how comments work, about moderation, and we begin to help students who are ready take on some of the responsibility for taking a look at that. In my personal experience, which is having done this at multiple schools over multiple years, although it's a very common concern for parents to have, it is an extraordinarily rare occurrence that something completely off the wall sort of finds its way in by way of a comment that would be harassing or inappropriate or even just something mean-spirited. Those things are extremely rare. They all can be caught long before the child is made aware of it, and certainly long before anything is made public. Occasionally, they can serve as meaningful learning opportunities about sort of how you navigate the world when something like that happens, but it's extraordinarily rare.
I could even, if I can add to that, just having lived it now for 2 years with my students, having the student blogs, that it has never happened. I know that's not a very long period of time, but it has never happened that we've gotten a comment from an external person with something that was inappropriate, mean-hearted, or anything like that. And the only comments that have been tweaked a little is when it's student to student and it's unintentionally unkind or not necessarily written in the way that they think that it is going to be read, and it only serves as a learning experience in those moments.
So before we pivot to specs and which kinds of devices might make sense and some creative ways that you can think about financing that, are there any other educational questions or concerns that would like to get surfaced? And by the way, for anyone who doesn't necessarily love the public forum for asking your questions, by all means, like, you are welcome when this is over to email any one of us with a specific question or concern, and we're happy to spend some more time with you on it.
All right, so I will share my screen again.
I want to see what's going on in that circle. They all disappeared. They all turned their cameras on.
All right. So I should be back to sharing. And as soon as my computer chooses to load, we will hopefully see the next slide. So the choices, yes, are, should I be getting a laptop or a tablet? Which one is preferable? Which one is better price-wise? All different things. And the truth is that when bring your own device, in theory, is you bring whichever device you feel most comfortable. It's all devices are accepted. And students tend to have a preference, and teachers tend to have preferences, and they don't always necessarily match. I can tell you that through surveys that we've done with students and with teachers, and then just living it as well, they tend to like the laptop more, but there are definitely students who enjoy an iPad more. So we do say that if you are going to be getting a laptop, most of them do already now. Like any computer that you would buy currently will have a camera, a built-in camera and a microphone. So that is something that we would ask that it definitely has. But then as you go through, there are Windows laptops, MacBooks, or Chromebooks, and they all we have here kind of the basic specs of what we would want that device to have in order to function as well as possible for our purposes. We would want it to have a protective case. We would want all students to have headphones, as they already should be bringing in. But if you have a device at home that you're, not sure if it fits these specs or it does not, you can always contact us, and we can ask Josh Max, our IT director, who is way more knowledgeable about this than I am, and would be able to say if, yeah, it's totally fine, that can work. So if you have a device at home already, this isn't to say that you need to go buy something new. If there's something that you have that could work for this purpose that you believe and you're just not sure, we could always answer that question. The differences between each of these is more in terms of what you can do with it, I guess, is how I'll explain it. And Leora, I think that kind of answers your question. A Chromebook is extremely difficult to get viruses on, because everything on a Chromebook is web cloud-based. It is attached to Google Chrome, which then is through your Google Drive, and so there you have your files, your images, everything that you have is basically online. So anytime you download something, it gets saved online, so you can't lose anything. That if something is suspicious and it does infect, you basically just wipe everything and reset it, and you don't lose anything because it's all already on the cloud.
Right, just to say that in other words,
yeah.
so a Chromebook essentially is just a sophisticated portal to the cloud. Like, Chromebooks really don't have hard drives.
Exactly.
There's very little that you can save on a Chromebook, which is both a plus or a negative, depending on how else you imagine you might use that device. It's also why it tends to be the least expensive of the options.
And you see that here, right? Like 16 gigabyte as opposed to 128 in the others, because you're not storing anything directly on the computer. Anything else in terms of any other programs or apps that you would install on any of the devices, if they cost money, that would be at the expense of the family. So if you wanted to install spyware on your MacBook to make sure that to protect it, or antivirus software, that would all be something that you would have to put on in addition for yourself. And then the Windows laptop is similar to a MacBook, but instead of it being Apple, it's Windows, Microsoft. So that's the differences between those. If you decide to go with a tablet, there's the Windows tablet or an iPad is what we've talked about here. And again, we would want it to have a protective case. We suggest a wireless keyboard because it tends to be easier for students. That's from experience that we've seen, that when from our own iPads, for the amount of that students start using them for, not having that keyboard can become extremely frustrating for them. But again, here are the specs for the iPad. And then when you have an iPad, again, you're not going to be getting viruses necessarily the same way. And you can wipe, and the apps that you've purchased, you can just reinstall afterward. So like I said before, with all of these things, we are not expecting anybody to be going out and buying the most expensive, newest version. If that's what you so choose to do, that's what you can choose. There are many, many options for used, refurbished, secondhand devices that you can purchase for a highly reduced price that are still in excellent condition and would work perfectly well. Like I said, if you have something already that you think might be good, you can ask us to look into it, and that could be a definite possibility. Something that I didn't know, John was the one who alerted me to it, and apparently he communicated it, but I don't know, I don't remember, that during this time, the Canadian government actually has made funds available specifically for education, and I've actually linked it here, so we will share the slideshow as well. But you fill out an application, and there's up to $200 available to families to support students during this time of distance learning. So if you haven't taken advantage of that, now that you may want to look into that and see how much you qualify for, if any. And if there are any other circumstances, financial circumstances that you feel we haven't addressed and that you would like to speak to anyone about, we are always here to have those conversations and discuss any concerns, or answer any questions. So in terms of whether you go with an iPad or a laptop, like I said, students eventually and teachers tend to prefer the laptop, but that's, if you look at majorities, there's always going to be some who don't. And there definitely are students in grades 4 to 8 currently who have had their iPad and are comfortable with their iPad. And that's the whole point of BYOD is that the students are using something that they are comfortable with, and that's what allows them to use it optimally for all the things that we said, is when they take ownership over it and they are comfortable with it and they know how to customize it and use it for the things that work best for them. So that is the end of what I have prepared.
I just want to underline a couple of things, and then
Sure. Do you want me to keep presenting, or you want me to?
I think you can stop the presenting.
Okay.
And looks like Sherry already answered that question for us, so thank you. I just want to underline two things. So in the sort of conversation around tablet versus laptop, I would say, if I was guesstimating, I would say about 80%, 70 to 80% of the functionality would probably be the same no matter what we're thinking about doing between the two. If you're looking for a tell from the school's perspective, there's a reason why we have 60 iPads and don't have 60 laptops in the school. It's because at some point, most kids will make the transition to laptops, one, and two, there are a certain set of apps for sort of creative kinds of things that the iPad actually is better for, but it's not enough of it that it should make someone feel like that's the tool that they ought to have for their child. And so having those iPads at the school means that if your child has a laptop and there's something very specific that you can only do on an iPad, we do have them available for those kinds of usages. Going BYOD in these grades means obviously we're able to increase the amount of iPads that are available in the K-3, but there are enough of them that if a teacher in grades 4 to 8 feels like he or she needs to bring in a few iPads in order to do something that iPads are specifically used for, then we have that availability to bring that in regardless of what happened. The other thing I'll sort of underline today, especially when we were officially notified that we will not be returning to school for the balance of this school year, I think it's important just to underline that the school's position moving forward, what we are planning for is a world in which the school will multiple times a year be called upon to transition into distance learning in response to what's going on in the wider world. We are preparing as if in October we could be notified that within a week or so we need to shut things down for a few weeks because of flu season or because of what's going on in the wider world, and that could happen to us multiple times during the course of the year. And so that's how we're going to prepare educationally. Let's hope it's not true, but we're going to prepare educationally as if that is going to be the new normal, at least for the next couple of years. And so obviously, in that world, all the more so, having access to devices like this will make a huge difference in our ability to ensure that those transitions are a little bit more seamless. So in terms of schlepping things back and forth, just to sort of, there's some assumptions. They haven't all borne out exactly in a straight line, but there's some assumptions that could be made between access to devices means access to a world of information at your fingertips, which means that the necessity to have so many textbooks and physical books available to you at all times starts to lessen. So it's not entirely proportional, but it's reasonable to conclude that that the school's reliance on physical textbooks for a whole host of reasons, like they become out of date, would be something that we might be investing less energy in, especially in a world in which all the information our students could ever want or need is available to them at their fingertips. So you guys are doing a great job sorting out this fund, which is great. Any other questions that people want to surface here? Hopefully people are still there. It's so quiet out there. I guess the party rages on. So I will echo Ms. Gordon's comment in the chat that we are grateful to Mrs. Thompson for putting this together and for organizing the presentation. We will find our way. Anyone who wants or needs access to the slides will figure out how to do that for you. And this recording will also get archived and shared out for the rest of the cohort. If any individual family has any questions, concerns, angst, anything at all about our BYOD, by all means, please do reach out, and we are happy to continue to chat. Have fun in the outdoor circle, enjoy your tailgating, and happy Tuesday to everybody else.